Welcome to Eviliv, the live media commentary show that answers the question, when did this novel take place with this many dragons all around? Subscribe if you're new to the channel because today we are reviewing The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin. All right, let's get into it. First and foremost, the back sort of cover text or the inset cover text that is supposed to give you some sort of like preview about the book says that it is in fact in the Song and Ice and Fire series. It is not set in Song and Ice and Fire. In fact, George R.R. Martin said himself that this was written before he ever started even conceptualizing a Song of Ice and Fire series, which is the whole Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon series. So this is not part of that world. It is not part of Westeros. It does not take place anywhere like that. That being said, this is a short story that he wrote back in the 1980s, and it appeared in a whole bunch of different places. Like, for example, it was published in 1980 in the Ace Books anthology Dragons of Light. It was illustrated then by Alicia Austin. It was later included in George R.R. Martin's 1987 collection, Portraits of His Children, and then it was illustrated by Val Lakey Linden and Ron Linden, and then the story was reworked in 2007, and it was released with artwork by Anne Yvonne Gilbert, and then it was again re-released in 2014 in, well, not this collection, the other one, with a series of original paintings by Luis Royo. So this has been released numerous times in different formats, 2 times in its collection and 2 times at least on its own. And it is very short. This is a children's fantasy story. This is not a young adult. This is not an adult. This is a children's fantasy. And when you strip away all of the images and all the sort of BS information, it's only like 70 to 80 pages long. It's really not very long at all. And in fact, you can listen to it, an audiobook version of it. I just borrowed it from my library, and it's 40 minutes. And if you listen to it at like 2 times speed, it's 20 minutes. So it's a very, very quick listen or a quick read. I would say get the physical volume if you're going to read it, because then you can see the amazing artwork, which really helps immerse you into the story. But look, I love children's novels too. I was a child once, and I have 2 kids who are growing. One is fully grown and the other one is almost fully grown. So I used to read children's books all the time to my kids. And then before that, I read them myself. So I don't mind children's books and diving into them from time to time, because sometimes they're good. Like, what are you going to do? Now, what's interesting about this is that when you look at it through the lens of George R.R. Martin, an author who wrote this and then developed a Song of Ice and Fire series, you can see some connective tissue very, very strongly in this children's story. And that tells anyone reading this that he has been thinking about this series for a very long time, and it sort of took his life over. And of course, he's found incredible success with it, justifyingly so. But it is very interesting getting a children's book version of George R.R. Martin's writing, because even though it's for kids, it still has some devastating information. So I am going to be spoiling the story in this. So if you don't want to know this children's story and you want to read it yourself and be surprised on your own, or reading it to your kids, then I would highly recommend you bounce out of this review. Don't watch it. But if you've already read the book, or if you don't care about spoilers for a kid's book, then by all means, pull up a seat, grab a drink. All right, so my initial thoughts of this short story are, that was okay. You know, it was not what I expected. It did not go where I thought it was going to go. It was not as long as I thought it was going to be. When I saw this cover, I really thought this was like a novel. I didn't realize it was a children's story. And I didn't realize it was a children's story until I started listening to it. Then I was like, oh, this is not. I mean, it's framed as a short story, but it's even shorter than that. It's not even a what do they call it? They call it a novelette. So it's not even a novella. It's a novelette, which is even shorter than a novella, which is a shorter version of a novel. So it's very just a tease of a story. Again, it was written by George R. R. Martin. This version of it was published by Tor Teen in October 21st, 2014. It is not a teen novel. It skews lower than that. Like single digit ages, like 9, I would say would be a good place, because the heroine in it, Adara, she is, I think, like 9 years old at the end of the story. And so when all the action in the story is taking place, the inciting incidents in the story, she's like 9. And then it sort of talks about her from 4 to 7 to 9 before you actually get, and it's like chapter 4 before you even get to like modern day events that are happening. So let's see. It basically follows this young girl named Adara who was born in the winter. She is a winter child. So there is very much summer kids and winter kids. Winter kids, and again, this is why it's so connective tissue to Song of Ice and Fire, because they're constantly referencing, oh, winter is coming. We're in the summer days. Oh, you're a summer child. You don't know what it means to be a winter child, and the pain and suffering that comes when winter comes. And so it has that connective tissue built into it, but it also has a connective tissue of dragon riders for the king going and fighting off on some, incursion of some war that some unknown bands are coming down and threatening the kingdom. So Adara is a winter child. Her family is a farming family. Her dad, her dad John, is a farmer, and when Adara was born in the winter, her mother died. And so every time John sees Adara, he sees an image of his wife, which brings him deep sorrow, and he can't find a way of showing her the affection that she needs as a young woman, not even a young woman, as a young child, because he's just reminded of the pain of loss and agony rather than seeing her for what she is. So this is a huge problem for Adara, because she's not getting the love and affection that children desperately need early on. This has made her distant and cold, and in the novel, it's actually explained that she's distant and cold because she's a winter child, but I would make an argument that no, she's a winter child because she's not getting the affection and the semblance of love that everyone needs growing up so that they become a normal, healthy human being. Instead, she is shown distance and only sadness, and in some cases, like aggression and revulsion by her family. And that's a painful thing to experience as a child. So there are these things called ice dragons that come out during the winter. And of course, dragons are everywhere, of all different colors and stuff. The king has dragon riders that he has fly into battle, and there's dragons on the enemy side. And so dragons are not an unknown entity here. They're employed at a regular rate. But winter ice dragons are covered with hoarfrost, and they have these crystalline white appearance, and they're dangerous. You can't even touch them, or else it can freeze your hand and hurt you, physically hurt you. And so everyone says stay away from them, and whenever ice dragons come around, it's like an omen of ill that is going to be coming. But Adara, being a winter child, always loves to play in the snow and be out there in the wilderness, in the cold and stuff. And there's these little ice lizards that appear in the winter that if you touch them, the warmth of your hand actually kills or hurts the lizards. And so kids are told never to mess with the little ice lizards. Adara can play with them, and it doesn't hurt them because she's still a winter child, apparently. She has some sort of connection with it. She ends up making a connection with this one ice dragon, and it lets her touch it and kiss it when she's 4. And then when she's like 7, it lets her ride it. And No one knows about this. Everyone knows that she's gone for long periods of time, and her dad gets really upset and pissed off and sort of, smacks her because she was gone so long. But, he does love her. He just doesn't know how to show it because of his own sorrow, his own pain. And that's not an excuse as an adult. You're supposed to be able to process pain. It may take some time, but that's what it means to be an adult. And you're not supposed to be forcing your children to suffer through your pain. You're supposed to show them how to become adults by seeing how you process grief so that they then learn how to then process grief themselves. So it's very, very, painful of an experience. Anyway, she has a brother named Jeff, an older brother, and an older sister named Terry. And then, of course, she has a neighbor farmer called Old Laura. And she interacts with all these people in various different ways. She also has an uncle named Hal, who is actually a dragon rider for the king and off fighting on behalf of their kingdom, keeping the enemy at bay. Never qualifies who their king is or what they are. It never qualifies who the enemy is, just that they're coming and being kept at bay by the king. So ultimately, winter is coming in this story, and summer is here. And this ongoing war is forcing their army to retreat because the enemy is so powerful that it's sort of pressing in on them. And so a lot of people have started migrating south to get closer to the king and closer to warmer climates, because up north, of course, it's a little bit colder. Again, I think this is a prototype world for Westeros that he would ultimately build out. Hey, Chris, how you doing, man? In your favorite setting, white dragons are the least intelligent. Is that how ice dragons were depicted compared? No. In fact, the dragons of George R. R. Martin world are not anything like the D&D dragons at all. I mean, not only are they not dogs with wings, which are the Dungeons and Dragons dragons, but they're independent and intelligent, but they don't schmooze with mortals. You have to be like of a certain bloodline or of a certain special type of individual to not be killed by them outright. So that's why the Targaryens are so powerful in Westeros, is because they're the only ones that can, only their bloodline can tame dragons. And that's why they're called the blood of the dragon. And so everyone else, like, you just can't, there wouldn't be like copper dragons chatting it up with mortals of different types, They're very much beasts, dangerous, deadly, monstrous beasts in this version. But only certain types of people can even approach them remotely. And they're sort of animalistic. They're not that high intelligent magic using that you get from Dungeons and Dragons either. In any case, ice dragons are no more intelligent or less intelligent than anyone else. And there's no indication that certain types of dragons are more or less powerful or intelligent than any other types of dragons. And in fact, there's no, other than their breath weapon, there's no indication that there's a difference between dragons. Each of them have their, different sizes that they grow into, and depending on when and why. So the ongoing war is coming, and the Adara actually like walks out in her travels and sees a bunch of like torn up people, like brutalized by war and in pieces. So she runs away freaking out about it, telling her dad. They go and they have to sort of dig graves and stuff. But what this does is inform you that the war is getting closer and closer to their home. And Adara doesn't want to leave because winter is coming. And when winter comes, her ice dragon comes, and she wants to be here for her ice dragon. That's what she connects to instead of her family, because her dad doesn't really show her the love that she needs because she reminds him of his late wife. So Hal comes by as the dragon rider for the king, and he's like, look, you guys have to get out of here. The army is like at your doorstep. They're going to be here any second. You need to leave. And her dad, John's just like, no, this is my home. This is my land. I'm not going to run. And Hal's like, you're going to die if you don't run. And he's like, no, I will not. He's like, well, at least take my daughter. Take Adara and take my kids, but I'm staying. And he's like, okay, I can take Adara And then Adara's like, no, and she runs off and hides. And so they go chasing, looking for her. By the time she comes back, the ice dragon shows up early, sort of answering her call for help. They have some sort of bond because she's a child of winter and it's a creature of winter, right? So it comes to her before it should. And so they sort of go back home and they see that Hal has been killed by this oncoming army. Her running away delayed their escape long enough for that enemy forces to come in and destroy him. So her uncle's dead because of her actions. And the family, the whole home is being sort of assaulted. So the ice dragon immediately starts attacking with Adara on its back, and it is fighting for her family, and it ends up getting attacked and runs off with the other enemies and ultimately defeats the enemies, but it dies in the process. She runs into her house, finds her family there. They're all thankfully alive, and they all flee south for the summer, knowing that the ice dragon didn't make it. On their way out, they did end up finding a pool of water, and so the inference is that the ice dragon melted because it wasn't winter and it died, and so when it dies, it is literally an ice dragon. It just melts into water. And so there's now a pool around her farmhouse as a remembrance. But she goes south with the family, grows up in the South as the wars continue to be fought and stuff. The war is eventually won. They return home, but now she's no longer a winter child. She has grown up and she realizes that her father has started to show affection to her because they're out of their sort of bubble that they were living in. She has grown, realizing that she can't just be isolated and alone, that there is strength in family and love in family that she never understood before. They suffered through war together, and that bonded them as a family unit. And so she evolved and she grew, and it ends the story with her looking at those little ice lizards, but she doesn't dare touch them because she knows she's no longer a winter child and she would kill them if she touched them. And she knows that she will never see her ice dragon again, but there's a little pool to remind her of this wonderful, powerful creature that defended her and her family. So it's this really great little tale about loss and pain, grief, the difficulty of finding yourself in a family that sort of rejects you in a way, certainly as a father who rejects you. It was a beautiful little story. I really, really enjoyed it. I think my favorite part of it was seeing not only the emotional dissonance and having a form of a catharsis for that dissonance at the end, but also seeing this whole story as a prototype of A Song of Ice and Fire. And that you can see, you got the dragon riders, you got the winter is coming in the north, and the armies of dragons fighting the king's soldiers, which are all dragonborn on dragonbacks too. All of that, and it's, this sort of like medieval small town little farm that they live in, and the story originates from that small little place and then explodes outward. All of that is very, very Song of Ice and Fire at its primitive state. And that's kind of cool. So I think this is a really good story for children, and I think children should hear stories like this because, and they used to, like Grimm's fairy tales, they were lessons. They were teaching mechanisms, and they were sometimes scary, sometimes absurd, but there was always a moral to those stories that explained this is behavior that is okay, and this is behavior that's not okay. And it's a way of instructing children. That's at best what children's stories are meant to do, rather than simply entertain for entertainment's sake. And this is one of those books where, yes, it has some dark tones in it, and it talks about death right out the gate with the mother, and it deals with the death of the uncle in a very brutal way that can be directly tied to the girl's actions. And of course, the war was coming down, so it's not directly her fault, but he stayed trying to find her, and that's when the enemy army caught up with him. And so you can see that sort of connection of consequences based on your actions. And so for that, I think it's a really good story for kids to read. We tend to try to overprotect our children. I know I have, and I see it all the time. We, as loving parents, you want to pad them from the brutality of life and the difficult portions that adults have to deal with. That is a part of life. But children have to learn how to manage that. They have to face it, and they have to know about it in order to face it. And the more that we shield them, the more we prevent them from learning how to cope and deal with grief and pain and dissonance with other people. And they have to learn to problem solve and deal with confrontation and aggression, because that is a natural part of life. And we don't want it too much of it, but it is inevitable that it will come up. So we have to give our kids room to be children that face non-children problems in ways that at least they're aware of, so that they can start to process how to manage them. And then us as parents, in our best methods, are there to walk them through it, not shield them from it. And I think that's a very important distinction. We have to allow our kids to hurt, and it sucks, and it hurts us doing it. But that's part of being an adult. That's part of being someone who is going to help raise a child into a healthy adult. And this story is just one of the many, many, many ways that you can help that process along, I think. Just my opinion. All right, my least favorite part of this is that it was a short story and it was way too short. I was starting to kind of get into it, and then it was over. So sometimes short stories are literally just way too short, and they don't tell you enough, and there's no follow-up to it. There's no sequel, and it's sort of isolated on an island of its own. I kind of want more, especially since it was reworked and released 4 different fucking times. Like, give us a little something. But I have a Song of Ice and Fire to fall back on, so I'll live. Ultimately, I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 evil eyes. It's too short. It says it's part of the Song of Ice and Fire. It's not. It's just, it's like tricking you. And I don't like that. If it came straight out and said, this is a very short children's short story, then you go into it expecting that. But when you're like, George R.R. Martin, Ice Dragon? Oh my gosh, I watched Game of Thrones and there's an ice dragon in that. Hell yeah, I'm going to buy this novel. And it ends up being like a 85-page kid's story. You're going to be a little burned. So a little bit of honesty, a little more, I should say, honesty in advertising for this novel would go a long, long way. Well, this novelette, we'll say. All that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate your time. So you're fascinated how the original Targaryen bloodline connected with the dragons started. Are they genetically connected somehow? Well, in Old Valyria, they raised them. And so there's a whole bunch of mythology that's built there, but he hasn't gone into a ton of it. And in fact, the novel I'm reading next of his is called Fire and Blood. It's about the Targaryen dynasty. And Old Valyria is where I am most interested, because that's where all sorts of really cool ancient history has happened in his world. But that's it. I mean, there's 2 families that came out of Old Valyria. They're the Velaryons, who ended up being like seamen and shipbuilders and sailors. And then there's the Targaryens, who ended up being the dragon riders. Those 2 groups, that whole area of Old Valyria was prophesied to end in doom. And after massive volcano eruptions and destruction of cataclysmic scale, they fled, and they ended up scattering across the world in Essos, which is a continent, and then in Westeros, which is a continent. And when the Targaryens got to Westeros, they saw a world ripe for conquering, and they did just that. And some of the Velaryons came with them and helped them, and that's sort of where that whole story starts. Not as good as it sounds, but as a kid story, you ever read is Aragon. I like the film Aragon. I never read the book. I'll definitely put that on my list. All right. Well, as always, I should say, like it or not, evil spelled backwards is live. So get out there and be evil.